Hi, Andrea. Thank you so much for joining the Introscope Internal Communication Spotlight series that I run on my blog. I'm very delighted to have you on my show, and I know that you are an expert in the employee experience domain, so wanted to chat with you about this. So before we get started, it'll be great if you could quickly introduce yourself for our viewers.
Sure. So my name's Andrea Greenhous. I'm the founder and owner of a company called Vision to Voice Communications. We specialize in internal communications. We're a boutique agency and we have clients across North America. And
Fantastic.
we've been in business for 21 years now.
Great. Let me begin by asking you this debate and the trends which indicate that organizations are moving from engagement to experience. I mean, what do these two terms mean and how different are they?
Great question. To be honest, I've never been a fan of the word engagement, and I'll tell you why. I think engagement first of all, I think it's overused. So use engagement and for in a lot of different ways, and it's sort of lost its meaning. And I think the original meaning came from the work that Gallup was doing, and they defined engagement as employees who are motivated and loyal and committed to their work. Mm-hmm. And so problem number one, nobody really knows what engagement means anymore, and we use it too often. Problem number two is really more of a strategic nature, in that you can have engaged employees, but if they aren't doing the things that you need them to do, they don't understand your business strategy, they don't understand the mindsets and behaviors to help you achieve what you need to achieve, then they're just hamsters on a wheel. They're working hard, but they're not going in the right direction. And one of the analogies I love to use around engagement is you've got 5 people in the boat. One person's disengaged, they're trying to poke a hole in the bottom, but if 4 other people are engaged, but they don't understand the direction of the organization, they're all rowing in different directions and they're just going in circles. So that's the problem I see with engagement. And actually the last problem is I really feel the focus of engagement is around the organization. Mm-hmm. And the switch I see to employee experience is really around thinking about the employee first and how they experience the work. It's a more holistic, human way of looking at how employees experience their workplace. And I think it's shifting for 3 reasons. First of all, and I noticed you have a background in environmental and social governance and corporate social responsibility. So I think a lot of organizations are shifting their notion of success. So they're not just looking at success as creating value for shareholders. They're looking at success in how they impact their communities, how they impact the planet, and how they impact their employees. So their measures of success are now broadening. And I think employee experience is key to that. And what we learned in the pandemic was employees, the lines between work and home are blurred. Mm-hmm. And the stress that employees feel, whether it's for a pandemic or what's happening on the global stage, those are brought to work. And if we don't really think about the whole person, then there's something missing. And that's why I think there's this shift to employee experience. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. I like that. I mean, for what can communicators do? I mean, especially internal communicators, because they are closer to the action of employee experience. So how can they understand this shift better, and what can they do to bring it to play at work?
Sure. So I think there's 2 things. One is really at a broad level. So I like to think about understanding, internal communicators can first focus on understanding what makes people tick. And that's understanding like the neurobiological aspects of human behavior, understanding psychology, and just really understanding at an emotional and psychological level what things motivate and drive employees and what matters to employees. So we know things like connection are important. We know things like gratitude are important. We know things like fun are important. We know things like self-actualization, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So understanding really those drivers. I'm certified in psychological safety, and I'm taking my Brene Brown Dare to Lead course. So understanding, like Brene Brown helps you understand things like shame and courage in the workplace. So vulnerability and humility in the workplace. So understanding at that level, doing your research, doing your reading, that would be number one. And then number two, take that down a notch and look at employees in your organization. So what makes them tick? What matters to them? And I'm always astonished that organizations don't ask people.
Yeah.
They don't take the time to find out. So one of the things we do is we do internal communications audits. And in those audits, we try and find out what matters to employees in terms of not just in the information they consume, but what broadly makes a good day, what makes a bad day. And organizations are typically really surprised at the results from that work, and we create personas, right? So what, the engineering managers, what do they care about? What is success? So that is a really important thing to do in terms of understanding, that's your starting point.
Great.
In your organization.
Fantastic. And in practical terms, how does employee experience play out in comms? So, I mean, where and what does it really mean?
So I feel like I want to answer it in a bit of a different way, in that how does employee communications impact the employee experience? And I'm always on a campaign to like change people's attitudes about internal communications. I'm sure you are too. I'm sure that's why this series exists. But the idea that internal communication is not an email from the CEO. It's not a town hall. It's everything that goes on in your organization every minute of every day. It's the stories and the content that people use to orient themselves. It's how much of their voice is heard in the organization. It's the channels, the channels. What kind of channels do you use? It's the openness, authenticity that you communicate. It's the tone. It's the personality that comes to life in your communication. My company name sort of came out of that idea that the voice in your communication can help drive the vision of your company. And that's so I really think that there's so much influence that we can have when we up our game as internal communicators in the experience of employees.
Got it. And you've been working with a lot of customers and clients. So have you seen any best practices, anything that you've witnessed, anything which you can share?
Sure. So I'm going to, this is a really great idea, because you can talk about the theory to forever without really understanding what is, without getting some examples. And examples are the stories that bring the work to life, right? So I'll tell my stories about some projects that we were working on that I really feel are great examples of shifting how we approach internal communications to build that employee experience. And the work that we're doing with clients around hybrid work is a very good example. So in the pandemic, everybody went home to their kitchen table with their laptops and started working.
Right.
And now, and it was wildly successful. Productivity went up, whatever. Now we're shifting to a more flexible way of working. And I like to think of hybrid as not just where we work, but how we work and when we work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look at us. You're in Poland, I'm in Ottawa, Canada, and we're making it happen, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what time of day. And so when we look at this problem of organizations introducing hybrid work, we think about it as a change. And every organization is different. We have one client where they always worked in the office. They had their own individual offices. Everybody was always on site. And now they're going to 3 days out of 10, they need to be in the office. Another client, tech client, employees all around the world, about 7,000 employees all around the world. They have remote workers and they have hybrid workers already, but they have a forward-looking executive and they want to push the boundaries to increase flexibility and empowerment.
Right.
And so when we looked at the strategy that we needed to deliver, we thought about, well, what matters to employees? How do we empower them? How do we to do their best work in a hybrid environment? How do we solve or answer the concerns that they're going to have? Things around well-being, setting boundaries, having difficult conversations with their managers, even just resetting how they communicate. Like, why do we use Teams? Why do we use Zoom? When do we send an email? When do we have a town hall? What's in our newsletter and what's on Slack. So we developed like a comprehensive plan that started with like an overarching narrative around hybrid work, where they're going and why, doubling down on messaging around trusting our employees, empowering our employees, but also understanding that it's a change and change is difficult, and that that this is an opportunity to learn and grow in as an organization. There was a lot of listening built into the strategy. So how do we listen and learn? Because we know we're not going to get it perfect from day one, because nothing ever is perfect. How do we build psychological safety into this process? And then what we did was we developed, so we're content developers, we developed all this rich content to help equip managers, equip teams, and equip individuals to solve those problems. One was like a comprehensive intranet with a whole pile of other tools built around it to help people navigate this change. And another one is a little bit different in terms of how we're delivering, the tactics and activities that we're delivering, the same ideas. How do we equip people, equip our leaders, equip our managers, and equip people and teams to thrive in this new environment? And to me, that's a really good example of putting myself in my employees' shoes, understanding what they need, listening to them, and building content and communications to help improve that experience in a remote or hybrid world.
Yeah, that really explains. I like the way it's kind of structured and how you're helping your stakeholders appreciate the journey of employee experience. So I want to ask you, you are also an advocate of culture, and what is the linkage between employee experience and culture, and how does internal communication help bring this to life?
Sure. So I need to draw this on paper because I've got it in my head, and I use a lot of hand gestures because I'm part Ukrainian and part Italian. So, but I look at culture, there's an interplay of business strategy, and that could be a more comprehensive strategy, an ESG strategy around how do we define success. Culture, which I define as mindsets and behaviors and values. Your values drive your mindsets and behaviors. For example, if one of your values is trust, you act in a very different way than if you don't have trust as a value. And then employee experience is kind of the mix of those two.
Right.
Right. And so in terms of culture, so culture are mindsets, behaviors, how we do things around here. What does it feel like to be a part of this organization? I'm a big side note, like this side note, I'm trying to try and not go down a rabbit hole, but I'm a big advocate for considering emotion in communications. We're all emotional beings that think some of the time. Emotions drive us, they connect us. So if I was going to describe my culture as emotion, what would that look like? What are the words that I would use to describe the feeling to work in a place? But then the other thing is, how do I, everybody's looking to make sense of things.
Yeah.
So how do I make this decision? How do I act in a meeting? What do people expect of me when I deliver something? How does that need to be delivered? So, helping people understand what those expectations are in terms of the behaviors. Sometimes you'll see people say, know, do, think, act, feel. So to get back to your question, the role of internal communications, in my view, is around helping people understand what those values and behaviors and mindsets are. What do we want people to know? What do we want people to understand? How do we want people to act? And the stories that we tell, stories are so powerful, right? They're like flight simulators for our brain. When we read a story, we understand, oh, well, that's how somebody solved the problem, or that's how I'm expected to act. And that's the feeling that resulted from this project or from this mistake that was made. A good example is around, so psychological safety is, there's a number of aspects. One is open conversation, but also is an attitude towards risk and failure. So in a culture, a lot of cultures right now are trying to break away from perfectionism and increase sort of risk and innovation and learning. And when you're learning and when you're innovating, you make mistakes. So how does communication shape that aspect of your culture? Well, first of all, it doesn't worry about being perfect. It doesn't always talk about perfect, wonderful things. I wrote a blog once called Drop Your Pom-Poms, because I see in a lot of internal communications, it's all about the good news and all the wonderful things that are happening, and nobody's talking about the things that aren't so great, the things that failed. And so when you have communications that are surfacing those stories that are talking about failure, that are talking about the hard things, that infuses your culture with the idea that it's okay to have those conversations. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to come up with a half-baked idea. So that's kind of the link I see. There's some subtler links as well, like, what's the tone? Is it professional? Is it friendly? Is it safety oriented? So we work with a lot of different kinds of companies, and a construction company, the culture in a construction company is safety and quality oriented.
Right.
Continuous improvement, safety and quality. Whereas a high-tech company, it's all about innovation, failing fast, agility. The tone in those two organizations is going to be very different. And so I think really understanding those aspects of culture that you need to reinforce, drive, live in your communication, in terms of the tactics and channels you use are all supporting that building of culture.
Fantastic. And as we wrap up, Andrea, I just want to ask you, what's your advice for leaders, communicators, as they think of employee experience in the future? Because like you mentioned, the pandemic has reshaped some of the ways we operate and all of that. So what's your thinking and what's your advice?
Sure. So I guess really it's back to question number 2, which is around really understanding that what matters to employees and the things that drive people. So, and putting that at the center of everything you do. So we know from research in biology, management theory, all that kind of stuff, we know what drives people. People need connection. So how do you build connection in your organization? People need a sense of purpose. This is huge. Like, we know that organizations that succeeded and managed to navigate the pandemic successfully all had a clear sense of purpose and always reinforce purpose in everything you do. I always say every communication should be wrapped in purpose. People need certainty and they need to understand. So you need to explain why and where you're going, even if you don't have all the answers. People need autonomy. They need to be empowered. So how do you use information and content to empower people and give them that sense of autonomy? And then I got a list here that I'm looking at because I knew I'd forget something important. And the last one is actually, no, not the last one, but they need to feel valued and respected. So how do we listen to our employees? How do we show that when people come forward with the ideas that that's super valuable for us?
Right.
When I do my psychological safety thing in organizations, one of the things I emphasize is showing how much value, how valuable that feedback is, how valuable those ideas are, like recognizing that. And then the last thing I think is around gratitude and celebration. I wrote a series of blogs on all of these things, but I think it's important. Gratitude, we know having an attitude of gratitude can really support us in those tough times, and which we're all experiencing now. It's a heavy time. And same with celebration. How do we celebrate together? How do we remember to take the time? You know, so many organizations are so busy, so people are overwhelmed, but how do we take the time to stop and celebrate our successes, our failures, the good things that are happening, and celebrating each other? So I think, to me, if you think about all those things and then you think about employee experience, like it makes so much more sense to be focused on employee experience and engagement, right? Thinking about building belonging, building a culture and attitude of gratitude. Yeah, that would be my advice, is to start thinking about your work in those terms rather than how do I get the latest announcement out from the CEO out about back to work or office reopening, not back to work. We've always been working. We're reopening our offices.
Right. Fantastic. This has been great, Andrea. I think the insights are brilliant, and I love the perspectives that you shared. So thank you again for taking the time.
It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.